All right, it's Monday morning, and an assignment was due on Sunday night, and that means that between now and Wednesday, you'll have the chance to, if you discover any bugs in your code that you submitted on Sunday, to fix them and resubmit. And ultimately, the mark you'll end up getting in the assignment will be based on the average of the performance of your initial submission and your revised submission. So if there were mistakes in the one you submitted yesterday, you will still lose some marks, but you can get some marks back by fixing the bugs and resubmitting. And I mentioned that we'll provide some feedback every time there's an initial deadline. We'll provide some feedback that you could use. You could also do your own testing on the side. So to get that feedback, we'll go over to Connex here, and we'll click on Testing Database on the left-hand side. Wait for that to load. And this is the result of us running automated testing on your assignment. And over the semester, this will fill up with other assignments as well. One thing to keep in mind is we have done no marking. The marking has not happened, so please don't contact me and say, oh, why did I get such a bad mark? Well, you didn't get a mark yet. Instead, we're between the initial and revised submissions, and after the revised submission comes in, which would be Wednesday night, we will run another set of testing on both the initial and revised submissions, and then use that to compute marks. If you think that we've made a mistake of some kind, so that is your code doesn't have any bugs and it does work perfectly, and you can prove that, and for some reason our testing shows that it doesn't, then there is a chance after the revised deadline to appeal the mark. And so I'll mention that in the announcement separately, but that does exist, and of course you should take advantage of that if you think a mistake has been made. But for now, no marking has occurred. So your focus should be fixing any bugs that occurred and resubmitting your code. So we'll click on this. Now, most of you, I've added a few extra tests here, but most of you will click on this and you will just get one row. It'll probably be named after your student number, and it'll look like this. I've added a few extra rows for this demo just to show you the kinds of things that could occur. In the best case, if you take a look at your one row for the initial submission, you'll just see a row of all green. What that means, each column here is one test case, and if it's fully green, that means the test case passed. And if you have a row of all green in this course, generally speaking, you can expect that you're good, and the assignment will get full marks. And that means that, unless the assignment says something specifically otherwise, and that means that if on your initial submission you're looking at a row of all green, you can just relax. And you don't even have to resubmit if you don't want to. If you don't resubmit something for Wednesday, we'll just copy your initial submission and use that as your resubmission. So nothing to worry about if your row is all green. That said, maybe it's still a good idea to get used to this system, because you might have a row of all green now, but odds are over the semester you might see some other stuff. So what you can do is click on each square of the grid, and that pulls up a window explaining this test case. So in this situation, the summary describes for this assignment what variable values we used, how many units we gave for each thing. There's our compile command, and then the compiler gave no output, and then here's the output that the program gave. And at the end, the automated testing system determines that looks good, it matches what we expect, it gives the time, we don't care too much about that. If there was an error, it may not be able to tell you what the problem was. Suppose that there was some problem around here. It probably wouldn't tell you what it expected to see, but it might say, this doesn't match the model solution. If that happens, up here in these resources, you could take a look at the code you submitted just to make sure that you have the right idea of what we're actually working with. We, of course, are marking whatever you put in the box by the deadline, but you can click up here, Model Solution Raw Output, and that will show you the output of the model solution on this test case. And of course, your output is expected to exactly match that. And in a minute, we'll look at an example of a test case that failed, and that might be a case where you use the model solution output to sort of reverse engineer where the mistake occurred. Then you could fix that bug and hand it in for the resubmission deadline. Okay, so that's one example, and I have a few other cases here. Quite a few people, and no big deal if this is you, will be looking at a row that looks like this. So this is a special status that says, this question mark on a green square, which says you have the right numbers. This is an assignment that's simple enough that we could figure that out. You have the right numbers, but the formatting is incorrect. And on this assignment, we will be lenient about that because it's simple enough that we can. On future assignments, if you are asked to produce output in a specific format, it must, absolutely must be identical. That means every space, every comma, every colon is in the same place. And that means that if you have a formatting error on future assignments, this will just be red. And if the square is still red after the revised submission, that means a mark is lost. For now, you are allowed to ignore this question mark on the green square if you don't want to deal with it. But I strongly recommend that you fix the issue anyway, just to get used to that process of resubmitting. All right, so let's take a look at this square here. If you look at the specification, what you will notice is the first line is supposed to say specialized engineering units. And here it just says engineering units, and it's not capitalized and whatever. So although all the numbers are correct, you get this warning that says, sorry, this isn't the right output, just to be clear, and don't do this on future assignments. So suppose you do want to find the problem and diagnose it. Well, here maybe we notice that it was this, but suppose it's not obvious to you. Quite a few people will write to me and say, I'm sure my output is identical. I'm sure there is no difference. And it turns out, they're missing a comma, or they've forgotten to write total in front of cost. Usually if the system says there's a difference, it's not lying. It does make mistakes, but it generally doesn't. So if you are told that a mistake has been made, the first thing I'd recommend doing is click up here on the model solution output, and then just take a look at that. Compare it line by line to your output. Maybe it's not that readable on this display. There it is. And then just verify that you actually have what is expected. And that could be a bit painful on later assignments where there's lots of output. But generally when people message me and say, I'm sure my output does match, generally there is a difference in there somewhere. It could be a space, it could be a colon. And this is a good time to get used to having to match that, because in a setting like this, it is important that everybody follow the same specification. All right, so going back over here, let's take a look at some other cases. So if you have a row of greens, even if they have question marks, you're actually home free, but I still strongly recommend that you fix those and get them to be full green squares for practice for next time, because next time if you have a formatting error, it'll just be red. That means that the test failed. Okay, so the next one over is this one. If you're in this situation, it's not a big deal. You are going to lose a couple of marks. This is probably the worst case you could have, which is what it's showing is on every single test there was a compile error. If there's a compile error, we can't mark your code. And that means that this row here, if this submission isn't fixed, it'll end up getting a 0, which is no good. And of course, that means you should figure out what happened and fix it. Sometimes the compile error actually means that you submitted the wrong file, that it couldn't find your file, and that's why it couldn't compile it. Other times it means that the compiler produced errors, and if that happens, of course, it can't compile, which means that we can't mark your code. Remember that if you get compile errors, you should always fix those before continuing. Make sure the compiler is giving no errors. So if you have one of these situations and you're stuck on it, contact me and we can talk about it. And then finally down here, this happens sometimes, maybe not so much on assignment 1, where you get a few red squares and a few green ones. Or maybe up here, this is a better example. Here, maybe there are 3 categories. The code style test, which isn't actually testing your code specifically on its output, just testing on whether it produces some compiler warnings that could be problematic. On assignment 2, this test case will become a bit more detailed. This test succeeded. A bunch of other tests had a problem with the formatting, but otherwise basically succeeded. But these 2 gave incorrect output. And I would recommend that you focus on solving these 2 cases first, and then, of course, also fix the formatting issue happening on the other 5 cases. And ideally, when you resubmit, you end up on your revised submission getting a row of all green. And your mark in a course like this is typically computed by taking the average of the mark that would be given on the initial submission and the mark that would be given on the revised submission. Now, that does mean if for some reason your revised submission is worse, you could actually end up lowering your mark by resubmitting. And so that might mean on later assignments, if you only have 1 red square out of, 15 green, maybe that's a sign just to leave it. But generally, it is good to try to fix the bugs and resubmit. Not only because you might get some marks, but also because being able to fix bugs efficiently is one of the main outcomes of this course and one thing that will serve you really well in future courses. So contact me if you want to talk about it or if you're stuck on resolving one of these issues before Wednesday. Remember that this is not the marking, this is just feedback, so we can't fix any marks yet because there aren't any marks yet, but I strongly recommend that you take a look at this and fix any bugs and then resubmit your code before the resubmission deadline.